Welcome to the ChangeOver, the podcast that gives sales and marketing teams at industrial organizations the fuel to grow and prosper in today's dynamic landscape. We're Wider Group, an integrated marketing and sales growth agency and one of the first 20 HubSpot partners in the world. We're glad you tuned in. Let's roll.
Welcome back to the ChangeOver Podcast. I'm Nicole Mertes.
And I'm Chelsea Drusch.
We are taking over for Greg Linemanstons this week since he is on vacation. And we are excited today to talk to you about our recent trip to Inbound. Those of you that aren't familiar with Inbound is a 3-day conference hosted by HubSpot, where you really can learn everything about marketing, sales, AI, all sorts of topics, lots of keynotes, lots of people, lots of breakout sessions.
Lots of food trucks.
Lots of food trucks, networking, you name it. So fun 3 days. So we just got back from Inbound. Chelsea, the one thing that I appreciate about Inbound is that you learn not just about these big concepts, but also there's so many great breakout sessions that you can attend throughout the conference. And I think that that's really important in this time with so much change going on. So I was really looking to see some practical things to walk away with and how we can apply some of these concepts and how we adapt to this change with some real examples. And it certainly didn't disappoint this year. So the 2 sessions that were my favorites were both ones done by HubSpot. One, HubSpotters talked about how their blog has changed over the last 18 months and how they've adapted to all the changes in the world around us with their blog. And then the second one was how AI is impacting how they do content marketing in general. So how about you? What did you really appreciate about Inbound this year?
Yeah, I think we're really aligned in that conceptually at a high level, I don't think anything surprised either of us as far as themes and the high level messaging we were hearing about what's important today and what's changed. I think none of that was surprising, but the thing that was really helpful were those deep dives, those breakouts that showed not only here's how things are changing, but here is how we have actually practically tactically applied that in this scenario, and walking through those examples like the HubSpot blog one you mentioned. Really valuable. I had another session similar that was a deep dive where we worked with an AI model live to build an AI-powered customer journey, and just literally getting our hands dirty and walking through an exact scenario of here's how you can do this is so helpful. You walk out and you're like, I'm going to go do that right now.
I know. There was a lot to take away this year, that's for sure. So where should we start?
Oh my gosh, I think we have to start with AI, don't we? Because it's the elephant in the room. And honestly, it's not even an elephant anymore. It is the room. It's like we live in the AI room now. There was a lot of AI last year. But this year, it was like not only what's changing and what is it capable of and what are the possibilities, but this year it was more like what are the applications? It felt more doable, not just eye-opening, insightful, interesting to understand all the potential and all the possibilities. But now we've been stuck in this, I get it can do quote unquote anything, but now I have to figure out exactly what I want it to do and then how to get it to do exactly what I want it to do. And that was like a really big gap to bridge. And I feel like this year's Inbound started to bridge those gaps for us and give us some specifics.
It's like testing time is over. Now let's really figure out how we're going to use this and put it into our everyday lives and into our systems and processes. So one thing that we heard a lot about, I think, was AI agents, right? It was, first of all, the whole conference, I think 75% of the session titles had AI in them, it felt like.
I would love to hear that statistic. I bet you they have it, and HubSpot tell us.
I agree. So really talking about what AI agents can do, right? So, and we've been talking a lot about LLMs, large language models, for some time, and people have been exploring ChatGPT and Claude, asking it questions and exploring with that. Now we have, I think, shifted and talking a lot more about agents where they may be using those LLMs and they're doing these tests for us, right? We're training them to do these and building them to do these tasks. So there's a lot of different examples of what AI agents can do. We actually have Rick Kranz here on our team. He built one for sales, and it preps you for a meeting. So if you want to learn about what a company does and just a nice summary in an organized fashion before you talk to a new prospect, for example, you can use this AI agent to generate this nice summary for you and shortcut some of that learning. So did you hear about any other AI agents that you thought were kind of neat at Inbound?
Yeah, I mean, that deep dive AI session I mentioned earlier, that's kind of what we did, is we essentially manually created an AI agent, not by the technological definition. We didn't build the code of it to make it happen and be replicable, but it was basically how the sausage is made of going from an LLM that has the actual capabilities to do most things. I don't want to say anything, but all the things, and layering on that next level of almost putting a point solution direction set on top of the LLM. And that's kind of what we did in that deep dive, is we said, okay, the task at hand that we want to leverage the capabilities of an LLM to accomplish is, I want to create a customer journey that is data backed by all of the evidence I already have today based on how my customers interact with me. So it's not traditional customer journey mapping in that you sit down and you talk through and you ideate and you discuss and you plot all of the things your customers do and think and feel. It's literally taking the data of how they interact with all your different platforms, all of the call transcripts perhaps you could ingest out of sales, all the actual hard data, and having the LLM interpret all of that, plot it all onto a journey map, and give you an actual, not just a subjective. I think it was Gemini, I think we used. We trained it in a series of prompts on how we wanted it to do that and gave it all its input. And then at the end, he showed us a prompt that basically told the LLM to create its own set of operating instructions, so that to do that same thing for like another client, for another use case, you just copy and paste just those operating instructions that you just taught it. And now that's your prompt. And now it knows everything already that you already just went through and taught it to do. So that concept is basically what an agent is. It's pre-training a point solution onto an LLM. And when we talk about agents, Dharmesh's thing is, how do you make that ability to create an agent, a point solutioned LLM-based automation assistant? How do you make that accessible? And Dharmesh is creating this agent.ai platform that he's calling like a networking platform for AI agents, which sounds ridiculous, but it's really kind of a directory where you can go and build an agent for a point solution, and you can connect various LLMs who are good at different parts of the process you need to build and make that into an automated process. If you think about like a workflow inside of HubSpot, it's the same concept, but the workers are different LLM models doing different things for you, and then you're automating them talking to each other and doing these predetermined steps to come to a solution. So this agent.ai is meant to help you find those agents that people have already built, or to go in and build one and then put it onto the network, so to speak. So that's what's really cool, is it's taking agents is the ability to take the guesswork out of what can I do with AI into how do I do that with AI.
Right. So it's a network, a professional network of
for
AI
our robot
agents
friends.
For our robot friends. Yeah. So I took a look out there. So you get so many credits. It costs so many credits to use your example, which is a pretty robust one, creating prep docs for meetings. But everything from keyword research, agents that will do that, or analyzing a site's design or copy. There's a lot of agents out there. So I definitely would recommend taking a look at agent.ai. And I just want to say too, Dharmesh, I thought this was really cool in his keynote. He talked about how tomorrow's teams are hybrid AI and AI agents and human. And so another theme that we heard and we fully expected to hear was that the search landscape is different today than it has been in the past. And I think all of us have been experiencing this. There was one quote that really hit home, and that was search volume is set to drop by 25% in the next year and a half. So significant drops in traffic, lower conversions on sites, and that impacts results, right? So that's why it was cool to be at Inbound to hear about different approaches and different things to do to make up to close that gap a little bit. So definitely a big challenge of today for industrial marketers, making sure that you're generating the quantity and the quality of leads that you need to grow. We talked, there was definitely a theme too about traffic going to YouTube and Reddit, which we've been hearing about for some time too, right? What do you think that means for an industrial marketer? I mean, certainly people are looking for answers from humans instead of brands, right? Or companies. We've heard that theme as well. And that's one of the reasons I'm sure we're going to YouTube and Reddit, want to hear human experiences.
Mm-hmm. Searchers are looking for unbiased input into their decision making. So they're looking for humans. And I think there's two important points here that are both equally important, and especially for the industrial space to really understand, is that there's one element to this where the humans within your business need to be brought to the forefront to tell your brand story and be part of your official marketing messaging. How do you bring the humans up front? How do they become SMEs? How do they use their own individual platforms to be an integrated part of your overall marketing strategy? That's part of how you solve for this. But I think the other important part is that those people are still affiliated with the brand, with the company, and the everyday searcher knows that. So the other important point as well is, how do you lean into customer delight plays and efforts that help create user-generated content and user-generated marketing? So how do you make more brand evangelists? Like, we've heard this in the past, right? We've heard, don't forget about the delight part of your flywheel. We've heard, make sure that your customers provide you referrals. Like, customer word of mouth is so important. This isn't new, but the algorithms of the way search works is catching up to how to solve for that and making it non-negotiable. I think we always knew that was the preferred human behavior, but the humans have been used to using search engines the way search engines have served them historically. And now the search engines are catching up, and it's almost this like vicious cycle. And now that the search engines are better at finding that one-to-one human input and surfacing that for us, now we're like, oh yeah, that's what we want. We need to get back to that. So there's definitely benefit to bringing your company's SMEs to the front as far as how do you evolve your actual brand messaging. But there's also this important element of how do you create a more engaged community amongst your customers already and get them speaking on your behalf in the spaces that matter, and bringing referrals and engaging with your content even after they're customers. And a really interesting tangential rabbit hole we could get into off of that for a moment, if you don't mind, is that type of stuff is very hard to measure. And I think we're in this weird dichotomy of robots and humans both becoming more and more important simultaneously. And it's the same parallel to, we've got so much data at our fingertips and there's so much ability to track and measure. And at the same time, the things that are the hardest to measure and attribute are becoming more important. So where do you put your effort? Do you go after data everything, attribution everything, because some of it is possible? Or do you recognize that there's so much value in these conversations that you can spur and the effects that you have where you make an impression on somebody who talks to somebody else, and then that somebody is the one you're tracking, but you don't see that touch point between their friend in your tracking, and so therefore you see no value in whatever moment that was that influenced them. Those types of things are really interesting too. So there's just a lot of warring elements at play right now that make for really interesting decision making.
I know one of the things we've been encouraging or talking about humans over brands is the way we use social media, right? So in the past, perhaps social media was a channel for amplification. And today, I think social media is, it's where you can build an audience. We see a lot more of SMEs, subject matter experts within companies posting from their individual profile versus from the company's the brand's profile. And there's better results from that because people value that human experience, that human point of view, the really just those connections, right? So when you can do more, I think we're going to see more and more of that really on social when it comes to the humans or individuals over brands.
Yeah, I think oftentimes as the marketers, we get frustrated with having to quote unquote play the game for the various third-party platforms we have to interact with. But they're not dumb either. They're also out to provide the best experience for their users. So I think what's interesting with the social platforms is you'll hear all the woes coming from marketers about how, well, the social platforms aren't allowing us to bring traffic to our sites anymore. They're just selfishly wanting to keep them on their own platforms, and so links get less exposure. And how do we even make this valuable for us if we can't bring the traffic back to our website? But those platforms are simply solving for what's best for them and their user base, which ultimately is also what's going to be best for us and our customers, assuming that user base and our customers overlap, which I hope they do, or why are you there in the first place? That's really interesting because what we need to realize is that if we can, as marketers, almost join forces with these third-party platforms rather than feeling like we need to figure out how to beat them or how to play their game, but realize that in the end, we're all actually trying to achieve the same thing, which is provide value and a good experience for our respective user base and customer segment. And so point being that the social strategies of today are more about buzz, those fuzzy things that we always snub our noses at as marketers because you can't measure brand awareness, sentiment, conversation. Those things are really hard to get your arms around, and so it's uncomfortable to spend budget on things like that. But I think it's becoming more and more important to realize that sometimes the value, even when it's unknown and unquantifiable, is worth more than the certainty of knowing what your spend is getting you.
And it's not just one thing, right? When you talk about attribution, it's a lot of things that add up to maybe a decision or a behavior on your target's part. So, that I think is certainly interesting. We talked about humans over brands as a theme. I think too, one theme that was certainly present within this conference too was how you keep humans in the loop, right? So how do you work side by side, AI agents, humans? What does that look like? So you first need to think about what AI does well and what humans do well. We just talked about humans and connection and experience and point of view. All of those things are what humans can bring. What can AI do? We heard from HubSpot the launch of Breeze, right? And Breeze has a few things that are included within it. One is Copilot. So you can think of Copilot as that helper. You can ask it questions and it's going to surface answers for you, working alongside of you. We talked about agents at length already, but agents are part of that as well, to help with certain tasks of the work that you do. And then intelligence. So Breeze Intelligence does things like enrich data or, automatically updating records with information, being able to do that in bulk. It can help identify those showing intent through the behaviors on the site. And then also forms. With forms, they announced with Breeze Intelligence, if it's already known, a certain property is already known, that property on that form or that form field will not show up, right? Because we already know it. So removing some friction there for users. So AI can do a lot for us. And one of the things that I heard consistently was that, that's a great start, right? AI can help start a lot of things, and humans really are there to then take that start and really take those drafts from good to great, right? With their own creative insights. So that was positive to hear, right? That humans have a significant and very impactful role here when we're working together.
I think one of the things that I came back and said, we need to figure out how to do this differently has to do with overall content strategy, but specifically within that, how are we even coming up with what to write about in the first place? So I think we've gotten, going back to that whole conversation of almost becoming slaves to the platforms, we've gotten really used to playing to the platform and figuring out if I know I need to get traffic from search, or I know that my audience spends a lot of time on LinkedIn, I need to create content that will be successful in those places. And that's not a bad train of thought, but it's not putting our audience first either. And especially in the search presence of it all, if you're thinking that way, and how do I satisfy to win this search, you're more likely to fall into the trap of commodity type content that your AI overview in a SERP is eventually going to take from you anyway. So it's just going to be a waste in the end. So one of the things that we're starting to think about is, how do we really shift our whole content ideation process to be audience first? How do we beef up our audience intelligence endeavors to really have a good understanding, not only on the outset of when you first set out to create personas, for example, or write your ICP, write out buyer's journeys. Yes, do all that in the beginning, but how does that stay living and breathing? How do we create systems? How do we use agents to perpetually bring this feedback, to do more social listening? The cyclical nature of marketing blows my mind. Like these are things we talked about 10 years ago that are coming back around with a different spin, a different flavor. How do we figure out how to always be in tune and in touch with what our audience cares about today, and use that as the first step to say, I'm going to write about XYZ because I know there's chatter on threads in the last month in my audience about XYZ. And then after you've identified because of those reasons, then you say, okay, and now what do I know about where my audience consumes content, and now how do I create multiple pieces on that topic to put in the places that they are, so that they come across it, so we get eyeballs on it, and not doing that in the reverse order. So I think that was a really big theme for me, is understanding that both for bringing more value to your audience reasons and for don't let AI cannibalize your content reasons, we really need to, even more than we have in the past, put that audience first and start from there every time.
Well, the last theme I think we have to talk about today is all about data, which is, again, going to bring up the AI, but data is the fuel. Yeah, data is the fuel for AI. So we heard the term unified data
7,000 times. Yep.
Which is really important, right? So without data, AI doesn't work. So I think this is a really good time for companies to be thinking about what their data looks like. First of all, do they have access?
The time has come.
Yes.
The time has come.
It's overdue. But access to data, right? So is your data in silos, or is it all integrated with a single source of truth? Is it clean? Do you have clean data? Do you have accurate data? Because one of the things that that enables you to do is do personalization at scale. I think it was Yamini that actually talked about HubSpot's success with personalization. When they personalized content, they saw a huge increase in conversions. I think it was 82%. Talked about how they're using AI at scale to personalize. So an example, they have visitors to their site. And based on where those visitors hit their site, AI is taking a look at, okay, what do we have in our HubSpot Academy? All the certifications and videos and helpful learnings for people. And it will find the most relevant piece of learning from Academy to plug in to the nurturing workflow that they have for that specific individual. So it's pretty cool, right? To be able to personalize at scale and to start seeing the results from that.
Yeah,
I think that's
and
a really good use case.
That kind of personalization is not the personalization that we typically think of. We hear personalization and we think about the basics that we're used to, like putting your name in an email. Okay, that's pretty table stakes at this point.
A token, yeah.
The things we can do today are literally hand curating at an individual level. It's like segmentation to the one-to-one. It's not only being able to take like groups of people and manually say this is what they need to hear and write 5 variations of your nurturing workflow for 5 different customer segments. You take all of that manual segmentation work and development of the messaging work right out by having that AI system literally hand curate to the individual level what will matter most to that person. That's crazy. That's a whole nother level. It's awesome.
Yeah. But we wouldn't have necessarily been able to do without some help, right?
Exactly.
Good. All right. So to close this out, 3 questions for you, Chelsea.
Oh, boy.
What was your favorite food in Boston, number 1?
Oh, that's an easy one. I had lobster mac and cheese that I made everybody at the table try because I almost died.
I tried it. It was amazing.
It was really good.
I think my favorite food was at the same place. I had a awesome lobster roll.
Can't go to Boston without the lobster.
No. All right. The most surprising thing that you learned or moment or statement that you heard?
Trick question. I don't think I was surprised at all. Honestly, everything I heard, and maybe this was selection bias on my part of what I attended, but everything I heard, I was like, that's what we've been talking about. Yup. It was an affirmation, a validation that we're all on the right track about what needs to shift and what needs to change. And then, as we talked about in the beginning, then some actual use case applications of the how.
I think that's the difference. I think we've been hearing a lot and we've had theories, and now we're starting to see those things put into practice and see the results from those. And
yes.
And so
be able to say this worked.
Right.
Not I have this theory, try this thing.
Right.
But I did this thing, look what happened. Go try it yourself.
That's a cool place to be in. What was surprising to me is that next year the conference is not in Boston.
You're right. I was surprised one time. That was the one surprising
San
time.
Francisco next year, which is the first.
West Coast, baby.
So that'll be really cool.
No lobster over there. What do we eat over there? I've never been to California.
I don't know. We'll find out. Last question. Advice for listeners, viewers, or a prediction for 2025?
My advice would be take a deep breath. I think we're in an overwhelming time of change, but I think we're starting to get a handle on the right next steps in a lot of areas. So don't freak out, don't get overwhelmed, and pick something to focus on. Like AI can do so many things. You could go on to agent.ai that Dharmesh created, that network we talked about, and find dozens of ideas. Pick one to get good at, to operationalize within your processes, and just go from there and see what happens. Because I think this time next year, the type of work we as humans are doing and what our day-to-day look like is going to be totally different.
All right. That's great advice, Chelsea. Thanks for sharing. This has been a lot of fun co-hosting this special edition of the ChangeOver podcast with you. I think that's a wrap.
See you next time. I'm doing it anyway.
Thanks for joining us on the ChangeOver Podcast. Remember to subscribe on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, Wider.com, or wherever you get your podcasts. Let us know what you'd like to hear about next time by messaging Wider Group on social media. Thanks for watching.
The best
I
part
don't know
is
how to
just
start
starting.
what does your face look like before you say the first word?
I don't know.
It looks like this.